In this segment, Stephanie Miller welcomes Noel Casler to the program. Noel is a comedian and a former contestant on Celebrity Apprentice. He takes us behind the scenes of what it's like dealing with Donald Trump without the cameras running.
You had Donald Trump over the weekend sounding a lot like when he started saying that the Epstein files existed, basically implicitly in some of his Truth Social posts, and sort of blaming it on the Democratic deep state, that he was maybe trying to lay the groundwork for the release of some documents that he was then going to claim were the creation of John Brennan and Jim Comey and Hillary Clinton and whoever else, which would be a normal Trump move. We don't know what there is. And so I'm going to stay out of that. I believe the reporting of our colleagues that there is no master list, some magic document. But Trump's behavior suggests that maybe there is something there that he's told Pam Bondi he doesn't want to have out in the public. Who knows what that might be?
By the way, could I ask, speaking of building contracts, could I ask a random question? You tweeted Trump never got a building contract that did not have a job attached to it. It's crass but true and well known in certain real estate circles.
Yeah, that's what he would do. That's what I was referring to. When he owned the Plaza Hotel, for example, he would have these big parties in his suite there, and he would invite building inspectors, guys he needed to do business with, loan officers at banks. And back then he owned Trump Model Management, where he would bring in these girls from, the post-Soviet bloc, Eastern Europe, and he would have them served up as party favors, basically, at these parties. And then he would collect compromise on the dudes who availed themselves,
So that would be blackmail, but on top of the human trafficking operation that he was running.
Bingo.
Okay.
And that's not hyperbole. That's in books. David Kay wrote about that. Richard James Zirin. Right. I'm not making this stuff up for your listeners. They can research it.
Right. So... Can we, speaking of Ivana, I was trying to, some people have a photographic memory. Did she not write in her first book about him raping her, right? And also, he got a hair transplant, a doctor that she had recommended, I think, and he was in a lot of pain, right? Or something didn't work properly. And so he wanted her to feel the same pain. This is what she wrote, that he pulled out clumps of her hair so she would be in as much pain and raped her. But then what happened that she then retracted it, right? And said, oh, well, I didn't really mean rape in the classics. Like, you know what I mean? She backpedaled after a settlement. Yeah. Can you explain?
The settlement, the divorce settlement. She talked about it. It left a scar on his forehead, and he said, "You ruined my life." And then he committed those physical acts of violence upon her and said, "How do you feel now?" Right? So she documented all this, but when they were going through the divorce, when they finally got the settlement, one of the contingencies was that she'd have to sign an NDA and retract those statements to get the check. And she did, and went off to live in relative obscurity until he had to catch up with her, last month. But that's what he does. And that's, that story is key. As hard as it is to hear, that's an insight into his personality. He's a very sadistic human being. He's much sicker than even the world knows, seeing all of his crimes. And I know tons of people that have similar stories. Not tons, but I know a few, and they're their stories, so I can't tell them. But, he was known as a very sort of violent, sort of man.
Can I just say, because you have such this history, people famously know that you worked on The Apprentice with Donald Trump and, started talking quite openly about a lot of things about him a long time ago. But you said what you're seeing from Trump's vast tentacles of corruption, IG toadies on loan from Doug Ducey, acting sycophants. You just said it should be very illuminating for those who wonder how Trump got away with so many crimes in his New York City days. Because people from New York are like, he's always been a crook. We've known that from day one, right? But you look right up through what's happening right now. You're like, oh, of course, he has somehow loyalists and people that are destroying evidence and God knows what, right?
Absolutely. He's always had a skill, a sixth sense to attract men and some women around him that he could corrupt. He can look into a crowd and see the kind of guys that are going to do his bidding, the dogs that hunt, so to speak. And that's what his security team was. Keith Schiller was an NYPD sergeant rammer who would knock down doors of drug dens in the Bronx. He was the guy who knocked the door down. He went up to Trump in court and said, "You need to hire me." Right? And Trump hired him. And then when you're walking around with a detail of ex-NYPD cops, you get away with stuff in New York City, right? Because it's an impenetrable sort of wall of authority. And Trump knows that. And we could probably get into it, but the Secret Service stuff seems I worked with the Secret Service ton tons. I did inaugurations. I did, the tree lighting at the White House, all kinds of stuff where the president was at. The Secret Service under Trump was a different Secret Service, and I went to high school with Bobby Engel, the guy he tried to choke in the back of the SUV.
Yeah.
And he was like a Marine kind of jarhead cop type. And that's the type that Trump will suck in. And it's almost like before they know it, they're doing his bidding. Do you know what I mean? I'm not even saying they all set out with the intention of being corrupted, but being in Trump's orbit will corrupt you by osmosis.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Who was the guy he hired because he saw him beat someone up? Wasn't
that Matthew Calamari?
The Squid. Matty the Squid.
Matty the Squid.
Yeah.
Right, Matty the Squid. And he beat up a guy at the U.S. Open, which was one of my gigs. It happened before I was on the show, but I did it for 12 years. And actually, our VIP box was right next to Trump's box, and he actually had assaulted somebody in that room. But yeah, he beat up a protester who was heckling him and Ivana. Like a fan at the U.S. Open, and Matty kicked his butt, and then Trump hired him.
Yeah.